The personality of Ted Bundy has excited the consciousness of more than one generation of people. Everyone from ordinary people to specialists in the field of psychiatry had various theories and guesses as to what could lead a talented and charismatic young man, who could easily build a career in politics or law, to begin brutally killing innocent girls. In this video, we will not dwell on the details of his crimes, about which many television shows and movies have already been filmed, but we'll try to delve into the question of what determines a person's consciousness, starting from childhood and ending with physical characteristics of brain. So, with your permission, let's begin. Statistics often reveal the roots of mental illnesses and deviations when analyzing the childhood of an individual. However, the perpetrator himself claimed that many could envy his idyllic childhood, as it seemed vibrant and carefree. Later, it turned out that these statements were filled with deliberate falsehood, as the psychopath intentionally deceived. The future serial killer and rapist was born in the small town of Burlington, Vermont, on November 24, 1946. Ted's origin raises numerous questions. His mother was Eleanor Louise Caldwell, whose parents were respected in the neighborhood. When it became known that the unmarried daughter was pregnant, the parents wanted to hide the shame from the public and passed off the born boy as their son. Bundy learned that his grandparents were engaged in education at a conscious age, and this fact probably had a direct negative impact on the psyche, although Ted himself openly laughed at this hypothesis. According to him, many children across the country found themselves in a similar situation, but this did not turn them into maniacs. Ted had problems with speech and establishing social contacts, and the results of his school assessment were far from brilliant. According to the memoirs of classmates, young Ted gave the impression of a rather reserved boy who only wanted to seem the best. After finishing school, Ted enrolled in the local university, Puget Sound, but a year later decided to transfer to the University of Washington to study psychology. Professors described him as a diligent student with a thirst for knowledge. In 1972, Ted earned his diploma but struggled to determine the professional sphere in which he wanted to realize himself. Initially, he joined a center aiding victims of violence, where he answered hotline calls, dissuaded potential suicides, and even compiled a memo for working with victims, adopted by all company employees. Soon, he decided to test his abilities in politics. As a straightforward Republican in the style of Richard Nixon, Ted started working in the campaign headquarters of Dan Evans, the governor of Seattle. He actively participated in the re-election campaign, simultaneously studying how politicians shape their image in the eyes of the public. When I first met Ted, he worked for the Republican Party, recalled his colleague and friend Marlon Wortman. He was a very nice person, the kind you'd want to introduce to your sister. Ted used all his natural charm for the benefit of the campaign, attending public receptions and dinners, engaging with people, and recording every word of Dan Evans's Democratic opponent, Rossellini, to use against him later. His efforts did not go unnoticed. "It's hard to believe that what I've done is of interest to the press," Ted modestly confessed to reporters. "My role in the campaign is so insignificant that I feel uncomfortable with such fame." Very uncomfortable. However, he was clearly deceiving at that time. In reality, Ted enjoyed being in the center of public attention. Soon Ted began dating his fellow student, Stephanie Brooks, which provided him with a chance to climb the social ladder. However, his beautiful future picture began to crumble. Educational and personal failures became significant challenges. In the summer of 1973, failures in entering prestigious universities and issues with Stephanie led to an internal crisis, described by him as a black hole. Thus, Ted Bundy's psychological portrait sheds light on his complex fate, starting from a challenging childhood through active participation in public and political life, to internal crises that influenced the formation of the future serial killer. Now, delve into the analysis of Ted Bundy's psychological state. At the moment, there is no information indicating that Ted Bundy ever sought the services of a genuine psychotherapist. This became evident when the court demanded a psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Ella Carlisle to determine his inclination towards violence. For decades, psychologists have delved into the psyche of this menacing criminal and killer, marveling at his ability to lead a double life sustaining long-term relationships, attending college, building a political career, all while secretly committing heinous and unimaginable crimes. Here are the psychological disorders, as presumed by experts, that could have been present in Bundy for many years. Antisocial personality disorder (SPD). In 2007, A group of 73 psychologists collaborated with the University of Kentucky to study Ted Bundy's mental health, with almost 80% concluding that he had antisocial personality disorder. In fact, he was considered a prototype of this disorder, meeting all the criteria outlined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders DSM-5, often referred to as the Psychologist's Bible. According to the American Psychiatric Association, symptoms of ASPD include egocentrism, actions for personal satisfaction against the law and societal norms, lack of empathy and remorse, inability to maintain close relationships, often using coercion and intimidation for control, antagonism, manipulative, deceitful, heartless, and hostile, unconstrained irresponsibility, impulsivity, and a tendency to take risks, psychopathy, while psychopathy also falls under the umbrella of antisocial personality disorder. Not all people with ASPD are psychopaths. Psychopathy, as defined by Harvey Cleckley, a psychologist considered the father of psychopathy, provides a more detailed characterization of the subject's personality. Cleckley identified psychopathy using the Hare psychopathy checklist, which includes superficial charm, lying and insincerity, lack of nervousness, inadequately motivated antisocial behavior, pathological egocentricity, lack of remorse and shame, inability to follow any life plan, and more. According to Dr. Daryl Turner, a clinical and forensic psychologist, Ted Bundy essentially serves as an exemplar of a prototypical psychopath. There are certain traits that we tend to see: a lack of empathy and a desire to assert one's own interests, even if the interests of others are trampled upon, he recently stated. But with Bundy, we see many other traits of psychopathy, such as pathological lying and very superficial charm. It would be challenging, if not impossible, to argue that Bundy, using his charm to lure women into his car, attracting admirers to court where he brutally killed at least 30 women, moving from college to college and never finishing law school, a series of murders inevitably impeded him, did not exhibit some psychopathic tendencies. Personality disorder, with narcissistic elements. In a study conducted by the University of Kentucky, about 95% of psychologists believe that Ted Bundy displayed signs of a personality disorder with narcissistic elements (NPD). These traits were defined in the DSM-5 as follows: excessive dependence on others' approval to regulate self-esteem and goal setting, impaired ability to understand the needs and emotions of others, primarily superficial relationships used for self-esteem regulation or personal gain, feelings of self-importance and superiority, excessive efforts to attract the attention of others, aspiration for admiration. To diagnose narcissistic personality disorder (NPD), a person must possess at least 5 of the 9 specified qualities. According to a research team from the University of Kentucky, Bundy not only exhibited this quantity but possibly even more. Bipolar personality disorder. Dr. Dorothea Lewis, a psychiatrist at the New York University Medical Center, specializing in the assessment of violent criminals, made efforts to prevent the death penalty for Bundy and other offenders. She argued that Bundy suffered from bipolar personality disorder, a mental illness characterized by abrupt mood swings. According to an investigator recounted by Lewis, in ordinary conversation, Bundy would suddenly become strange, undergoing metamorphoses, changing his figure and expression, emitting odors. Lewis noted that he could shift from euphoria and compulsive talking to anger accompanied by prolonged periods of sullen silence, and provided examples of various drawings created by Bundy. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness (NAMI), most experts from the University of Kentucky study stated that Bundy exceeded the diagnostic threshold for borderline personality disorder, a condition characterized by unstable personal relationships, impulsivity, self-harm, prolonged periods of depression, and changes in self-esteem. Schizoid personality disorder. More than half of the psychologists in the University of Kentucky study also identified Bundy as having schizoid personality disorder (SPD), an extreme form of antisocial personality disorder. People with SPD exhibit indifference to others and lead a socially isolated lifestyle. According to the U.S. National Library of Medicine, although SPD may resemble schizophrenia, they are substantially different. A person with SPD remains connected to reality and makes sense. In their words, while schizophrenia involves delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized speech, according to DSM-5, psychologists likely concluded that Bundy had SPD based on his inability to express emotions, act appropriately in social situations, and preference for solitude. Pornography addiction. In 1989, on the eve of his execution, Ted Bundy conducted an interview with James Dobson, during which he diagnosed himself as a pornography addict. Although there is no specific disorder in the DSM directly linked to pornography, many expert psychologists talk about addictive disorders, describing a person for whom certain substances or behaviors are a way to alleviate anxiety or depression, and who experiences a kind of satisfaction engaging in them. The most destructive forms of pornography, and again, I speak from personal experience, from a heavy, real-world experience, are those associated with violence and sexual violence, because, as I know all too well, the combination of these two forces leads to behavior that is simply impossible to describe. Noted Bundy, he continued, once you become addicted to it, and I consider it a form of addiction, like other kinds, you start seeking more powerful, explicit, and graphic materials. Similar to an addiction, you continue to crave something more intense. It brings you increasing pleasure until you reach a point where pornography goes too far. You reach a moment when you begin to question whether the real enactment of what goes beyond simple reading or viewing can satisfy you. After examining the psychological aspects and signs of antisocial behavior, let's now look at the physical structure of the brain. The world of serial killers is striking in its rarity and simultaneous fascination. It's no wonder that after Ted Bundy's execution in 1989, his brain became the subject of heightened interest. The scientific community has long analyzed the connection between brain chemistry and uncontrolled psychopathy that turns people into emotionless serial killers. These studies remain relevant today as the brains of infamous killers become valuable subjects in the field of neurobiology, focusing on the dark aspects of human psychology. Brain damage in specific brain regions is not uncommon among serial killers. Many of the most notorious criminals suffered severe trauma or were involved in accidents causing irreversible damage to their brains. It is believed that these traumas play a pivotal role in their criminal behavior. The features of the brain responsible for positive emotions, social interaction, and impulse control are so damaged in many serial killers that they cease to function. Neurobiologists hypothesize that externally balanced, successful young individuals may have hidden brain damage enabling them to commit heinous crimes, including abductions and murders. Determining whether these horrifying acts were caused by brain damage and reinforcing this hypothesis became the goals of neurobiologists. After Bundy's execution, they gained access to his brain. Bundy's brain has long drawn the attention of police, psychiatrists, and those who knew him even before his death. His intellect was undeniably outstanding. More precisely, his IQ was 136, approaching the genius level. To technically be considered a genius, a score of 160 is required, while the average human intelligence level is around 100. Researchers search for something unusual in Bundy's brain defects, tumors, deformities, or clear signs of trauma. However, what they found in the laboratory surprised the team. The physical structure of his brain looked extremely normal. There were no signs that Bundy had brain damage during his life, although a preserved specimen of a deceased body can provide only limited information. Brain imaging using the SPECT method, which tracks blood flow and overall brain activity, clearly showed that the brains of ruthless killers function differently. The area of the brain responsible for empathy and impulse control is less active in most killers. The absence of activity in this area is often associated with brain damage due to trauma. However, this didn't seem to be the case for Ted Bundy. Perhaps he was born with a brain defect, or his prefrontal cortex was underdeveloped. Now that we've explored the intricacies of Ted Bundy's brain and delved into the neurobiology of modern research, let's transport ourselves to the 19th century, when the foundational works of Lombroso and Galton paved the way for understanding the connection between brain structure and behavior. In the second half of the 19th century, Italian physician Lombroso began studying the criminal behavior of homicidal maniacs, claiming that it had a physical predetermination. He sought to identify phenotypic traits such as larger lobes, facial and cranial asymmetry, prognathism, and elongated arms. Lombroso argued that these traits indicated the underdevelopment of a person approaching wild primates, and in his view, such individuals were doomed to psychopathy and criminality. Darwin's relative, Francis Galton, engaged in eugenics, where the main idea was to reproduce those with high intellectual and physical attributes, When the Nazis came to power, these ideas were implemented in practice. After the victory over Germany and the disclosure of information about Nazi crimes, discussions about antisocial behavior in Europe reached harsh heights. It became relevant to consider that the social environment, childhood period, and family disunity shape criminals. In recent decades, specific disciplines known as neurocriminology have emerged, an area applying methodologies to understand, predict, treat, and prevent violence and crime. Criminal behavior and violence are increasingly viewed as significant public health problems worldwide. We face a biopsychosocial phenomenon. Obviously, we cannot exclude these psychological and social factors. Nevertheless, in the field of neurocriminology, there are certain ethical and legal issues. For instance, Dr. Adrian Rain points out that there may come a time in the future when all men aged 18 and older undergo brain scans and DNA tests to predict the risk of violent behavior. The development of violence on a neurological basis is becoming increasingly evident. It is important to understand that while biology is essential, it is not the sole explanation for criminal behavior. Other risk factors include the environment, abuse, cruelty, and neglect. However, the context must also be considered, as demonstrated by Philip Zimbardo in his famous Stanford prison experiment. Philip Zimbardo, born in New York on March 23, 1933, graduated from Yale University in 1954 with a Ph.D. in psychology. He taught at various universities, including New York University, where he practiced until 1967. His Stanford prison experiment, conducted in 1971, attracted public attention with its sharp demonstration of extreme behavior and was prematurely terminated after 6 days. The individuals playing the roles of prison guards quickly exhibited sadistic and cruel behavior towards the experiment's inmates. The prisoners also began to revolt, and many developed depressive and hopeless behavior. The question of the ethics of this study is still debated. Despite objections, Philip Zimbardo later expanded the results of the experiment, drawing parallels with the Abu Ghraib prison. He included all this information in his book The Lucifer Effect: Why Good People Turn Evil. Now let's consider the neurobiological basis of violence. According to neurocriminology, the network involved in violent behavior includes the following structures: white matter of the prefrontal cortex, amygdala playing a crucial role in the development of aggressive behavior, hypothalamus necessary for expressing emotions, serotonin, a neurotransmitter most associated with violent behavior, norepinephrine, also part of the neurobiological basis of aggression. Additionally, substances such as catecholamines, GABA, glutamate, acetylcholine, nitric oxide, vasopressin, substance P, histamine, and endogenous opioids are involved. In order to provide a justification for the fact that brain features do not play a dominant role in a person's mental state and his criminal future, let's give the example of James Fallon. James Fallon, as a researcher in the field of neuropsychology, emphasized that the activity of individual sections of the brain system has an indirect effect on human behavior. In October 2005, neurologist James Fallon was conducting brain scans of serial killers as part of a research project at the University of California, Irvine. He studied thousands of PET scans to identify anatomical patterns in the brain correlating with psychopathic tendencies in real life. I was looking at many scans of killers, schizophrenics, depressed individuals, and normal brains, he says. Accidentally, I also ran a study on Alzheimer's disease and had brain scans of myself and my family right on my desk. I reached the bottom of the stack and found this scan that was clearly pathological, he notes, pointing to low activity in specific areas of the frontal and temporal lobes responsible for empathy, morality, and self-control. Upon realizing that this scan belonged to a family member, Fallon checked his lab's PET machine. It was working properly and realized he needed to overcome fear and find out whose brain was depicted. Looking at the code, he faced an unsettling revelation. The brain resembling a psychopath on the scan was his own. Many would prefer to conceal such a discovery, fearing stigma, but not Fallon. Perhaps because courage and openness, traits of psychopathy, prompted him to share his experience in a TED Talk, an NPR interview, and finally in his new book, The Psychopath Inside. In this work, Fallon seeks to explain how a person leading a happy family life can demonstrate the same anatomical features as serial killers. I've never killed or raped, he emphasizes. At first, I thought maybe my hypothesis was wrong. And these brain areas are not related to psychopathy or murders. However, genetic tests brought even worse news. I had genes with a high risk of aggression, violence, and low empathy, he says, mentioning the MAO gene variant associated with aggressive behavior. Based on subsequent neurological and behavioral studies of psychopathy, he concluded that he is indeed a psychopath, but a relatively prosocial one, someone who struggles with empathy but within socially acceptable limits. This didn't shake Fallon much, as he had always been aware of his inclination toward power and manipulation, he says. Even in his lineage, there were presumed murderers, including Lizzie Borden, accused of killing her father and stepmother in 1892. However, the fact that a person with psychopathic genes and a brain can become nonviolent and successful made Fallon reconsider the ambiguity of this term. Ultimately, psychopathy is not included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, partly due to its diverse symptoms. Not all psychopaths become murderers. Some, like Fallon, exhibit different aspects of psychopathic behavior. Why was Fallon able to adjust his behavior while others with similar genetics and brains commit heinous acts and end up behind bars? Once a supporter of genetic determinism, Fallon revised his views on the influence of genes on behavior. He now claims that his childhood shaped his choices as he made efforts to change his behavior. Bundy emerges as a personality susceptible to various mental disorders, including antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, and narcissistic personality disorder. Expert assessments emphasize that his behavior, encompassing maintaining a normal life in society while secretly committing horrific crimes, speaks to his ability to lead a double life. Antisocial personality disorder, defined as a set of characteristics including egocentrism, disregard for the law, lack of sympathy and remorse, antagonism, and unrestraint, was presumably recognized in Bundy, confirming the complexity of his psychological state. Psychopathy, characterized by superficial charm, deceitfulness, pathological egocentrism, and lack of shame, was also considered a part of his personality, according to the definitions of Hervé Cleckley and Dorel Turner. The possibility of Bundy having narcissistic personality disorder was also mentioned, characterized by excessive reliance on others to regulate self-esteem, a sense of superiority, and a desire for admiration. Additionally, the hypothesis of bipolar personality disorder and schizoid personality disorder was discussed, underscoring the complexity in seeking explanations for his extremely destructive behavior. Brain analysis of Bundy, despite his high intelligence IQ 136, did not reveal physical anomalies, although neurobiological studies in neurocriminology highlight the connection between brain structure and atypical behavior. In serial killers, this comprehensive analysis underscores the complexity of understanding mental disorders, their interrelation, and their impact on behavior. It also highlights the relevance of the discussion in the field of neurocriminology, which, as studies from the 18th and 19th centuries show, is at the center of consciously managing human behavior.